So I am interested. Well, some of you are interested in some analysis about the prime of Miss Jean Brody, and I downloaded the book, and I was gonna download the play, but I was like, nah, you know, I'm just gonna download the book, and I haven't gone through the book yet. Um, but this gentleman, Leo, he has about 2,500 subs. So go follow him, like the video, say what's up. About 383 comments on the video, so a lot of discussion there. Say what's up and say hello. Go give him a subscribe if you're so inclined. But he's kind of presenting, and I haven't seen this before, so he's kind of presenting Patsy Ramsey in the prime of Miss Jean Brody in the key to the JonBenét case. And he's, as I understand it, just a little bit, he's presenting a little bit of Cotton Star Manifesto's work. And we know Cotton Star. We know the work that Cotton Star has done. So go say what's up to Cotton Star. Like, share, subscribe, his stuff as well. Man, Cotton Star does good work, man. That's just what it is. So without further ado, Blind reacts to this, and yeah.
People are into true crime is that most people find it very hard to put themselves in the place of a killer, a murderer. We tend to want to understand things that escape ready explanation. For example, I think I've always thought this is one of the reasons why I'm so fascinated with the NXIVM cult, the cult where Keith Raniere had a harem of Hollywood women at his beck and call, and millionaire heiresses funding him to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars when he looks like a creepy cult guy out of Central Casting to me. I don't understand that NXIVM cult one bit, how anyone ever believed anything that guy said. So consequently, I've been fascinated with the NXIVM case since I first heard about it. Same deal goes for the JonBenét Ramsey case. I think on a couple of different levels, actually. At the time in the mid-90s when it first happened, I think a lot of people were fascinated because they couldn't wrap their heads around the fact that the Ramsey family could be guilty of murdering their daughter. I mean, they seemed like the perfect, rich, upper-class executive family living in a nice mansion. Father's a CEO. Mother's a very put-together looking housekeeper, former Miss West Virginia. A lot of respectability going on there. I think at the time, law enforcement were a lot more apt to have those sort of biases get the better of them. And today people realize that those sort of surface-level appearances can be very deceiving. So now as the cases remain officially unsolved for going on 3 decades, when I look at the case, one of the things that has always baffled me is the ransom note. It's such a ridiculous thing. I mean, it's unlike any other ransom note ever written, with very few parallels. I mean, the only one that really stands out, and I've done a video about on this channel, is the ransom notes in the Lindbergh case. And that's always been one of the central questions of the Ramsey cases. Who would be crazy enough to leave that sort of ransom note if they were staging an inside job kidnapping? In other words, if the Ramseys really did kill JonBenét, who in their right mind would think that ransom note, that long, rambling, endless, strange ransom note, was a good idea? A ransom note full of theatricality and quotes cribbed from stage and screen. What a strange beast that thing is. And also all of the weird breadcrumb trails that seem to be implicit in it. The $118,000 that makes 0 sense as a sum of money to ask for. All of the internal contradictions in the note, like the small foreign faction who refers to themselves as foreign or small or a faction. And why would this foreign faction care if you're well-rested or possess an adequate-sized attaché while spelling attaché correctly, including the accent, but flubbing the extra S in possess? So it's with this...
Good point. Like, how would I be so? Are these people French? I don't know. Maybe I could tell us something about the intruder. If they spell attaché wrong, right? They struggle with possession. I don't know.
This backdrop in mind, that I ran across an incredible Reddit thread recently that has a bunch of extra insight.
They're like they knew that they were going to kidnap JonBenét, so they're just like writing attaché like over and over again, like 100 times on a piece of paper. It's like attaché. Don't worry about possession. Like, you know, you're going to use that word. Don't worry about it. You can screw that word up. Don't worry about that. Just make sure you get the accent on attaché correct. Come on.
Insights into the mind behind the ransom note. There's so many things in this thread that made so many things about this case and the ransom note specifically fall into place and make sense after so many years of cudgeling my brains about what could this possibly mean. This thread ended up explaining a lot of it. And the thread's title is called Profoundly Patsy, and it explores the influence that a short coming-of-age novel called The Prime of Miss Jean Brody had on a young woman named Patsy Paw in West Virginia, who later...
Coming-of-age novel. Patsy gave John's daughters a coming-of-age party.
grew up to become Patsy Ramsey, the mother. The Reddit user that created this thread, Cotton Star, by the way, I want to say at the outset here, has a YouTube channel as well that you should check out. He's got a couple of really interesting videos on there about the Ramsey case, including a good one about the other friends of the Ramseys, like the Steins, and how close they lived to the Ramseys.
I wonder if he's military, if Cotton Star is military. He had a rucksack right there.
At the time of the death of JonBenét. The writer of this thread, Cotton Star, managed to mine a bunch of really captivating nuggets from checking out the book and movie versions of The Prime of Miss Jean Brody, which we'll get into more about the author and the different versions of it. But there's so many things that were pointed out in this thread and that we'll look at in going through the different material that end up having connections to things that are in the ransom note or things that just about Patsy's life in general. There's just a handful of different concepts and words that come up that have resonance to the ransom note. Like the word attaché comes up. We have the extra S in possession being a misspelled word. And we have pineapples with cream involved in the plot of the book. So how does this book relate to Patsy? Well, if you don't know anything about Patsy Ramsey, née Paw, she's from West Virginia, and one of the main claims to fame that she has is that, and we have pineapple or things that just about Patsy's life in general. There's just a handful of different concepts and words that come up that have resonance to the ransom note. Like the word attaché comes up. We have the extra S in possession being a misspelled word. And we have pineapples with cream involved in the plot of the book. So how does...
Specialty of the feast was pineapple cubes with cream, and the specialty of the day was that they were left to themselves. Sandy, the unfamiliar pineapple had the authentic taste and appearance of happiness. She focused on her small eyes closely on the pale gold cubes before she scooped them up in her spoon, and she thought the sharp taste on her tongue was that of a special happiness, which was nothing to do with eating. It was different from the happiness of play that one enjoyed unawares. Both girls saved the cream to the last, then ate it in a spoonful. Little girls, you are going to be the creme de la creme, said Sandy, and Jenny spluttered her cream into her handkerchief.
How does this book relate to Patsy? Well, if you don't know anything about Patsy Ramsey, née Paw, she's from West Virginia, and one of the main claims to fame that she has is that she won Miss West Virginia and participated in the Miss America pageant. What a lot of people don't know is that her talent in those pageants was reciting a scene from a play, and that scene, at least in the earlier competitions, was a scene directly from The Prime of Miss Jean Brody, the climactic confrontation between the protagonist Jean Brody and the evil head mistress, which is a very intense and dramatic scene. And this was a very different approach for a Miss America contestant at the time. I mean, I think a lot of the talent would, just be singing like a popular song or doing something maybe like a dance number, but this, reciting a scene from a play as both characters doing multiple voices was, I think, a very unusual and a different choice. So I think in that sense, Patsy really did stand out. And the other thing about the plot of The Prime of Miss Jean Brody is that the plot of the movie especially revolves around a fake doctored letter, and there's just so many different things in the book and the movie versions of it that can be seen to have a sort of outsized or different presence when you know what happened in the JonBenét case, and especially echoes in the ransom note show up over and over again. So we'll go over those here in this video. And the other great resource that's mentioned in the Profoundly Patsy thread is a book by a friend of Patsy Ramsey's named Linda McLean. It's called JonBenét's Mother, The Tragedy and the Truth. And this book has a lot of anecdotes from friends of Patsy's and people that knew her growing up. And there's a few nuggets in here about her relationship with the prime of Miss Jean Brody and just little things about who Patsy was so that we'll get to know her better and we'll get a fuller picture of her. One thing I want to say about doing this research and sort of taking a different tack here to really. And the other great resource that's in here about her relationship with the prime of Miss Jean Brody and just little things about who Patsy was so that we'll get to know her better and we'll get a fuller picture of her. One thing I want to say about doing this research and sort of taking a different that we'll get to know her better and we'll get a fuller picture of her. One thing I want to say about doing this research and sort of taking a different tack here to really try to get to know Patsy and maybe even try to see her as maybe one of her friends see her is that I definitely have like a much fuller appreciation of Patsy Ramsey, whereas before I think she was a little bit more one-dimensional in my head. I kind of just thought her as like more of like a cartoon villain because she is pretty comically evil in a sense. But on the other hand, I think, once you sort of understand a little bit more about her situation and where she came from and who she was, in a certain sense, some of what she went through can start to make its own infernal logical sense, and you start to understand her as a mother who is very protective of her children from a certain light. Now, not that I agree with it, but I mean, it's just, you come to understand Patsy as a multi-layered person and as a woman who, that's one other thing that really gets emphasized when you hear all the little stories about what was going on at the time and sort of the background and all the different people in her life, is that there were a couple other things that are also interrelated with the story in the prime of Miss Jean Brody that were affecting Patsy and that were part of the milieu of the case that don't often get talked about. And those are that Patsy had just turned 40 right before the murder of JonBenét, and she had also just gone through cancer. So those are two other parallels that end up having some resonance with the books as well as real life and may have affected the case. So there's a lot of little interesting little nuggets like that we'll touch on. Yeah. So, and we'll also have links to all of this.
Because it's interesting the fact that when we look at it's interesting that pineapples are at the center of this case, because when we look at what is seen, and especially pineapples with milk or pineapples with cream or whatever it was, why would that be sitting there? Where did you get that from? And it's crazy because John will tell you, as we saw in John's analysis, John's yearbook analysis, John will tell you what he's thinking, why he's thinking it. I'm trying to be this way because I saw my dad do it. I'm trying to be this way because that's how I know a man to be. That's what I see a man as. And the same thing with Patsy. I am doing this because I see life being this way. My mom taught me that I should shoot for the stars in this way. And so therefore my compass is this. This is my north, and part of my north includes the things that I've seen in books. I want to be like, you've probably seen a video or a movie that you're like, man, when I get money, I'm going to get my own place. Nobody's going to tell me nothing. I'm going to get a big TV like I see on this TV. I'm going to get me a nice ride, man. I'm listening to my music all night. I'm going to stay up all night and sleep all day. And I'm going to order pizza and whatever I want. Because you see that on the movies, and like, as soon as you, like, say, for example, like, Ninja Turtles in the 90s or something like that, and it's like, oh man, they're so cool for their layer. And so a lot of times, men will try to build their man caves in a sort of very, I want to say swamp-like way, but in a very, men just decorate differently. They decorate differently and they appreciate colors differently is what it is. But it's not dudeish. It's just like, I want this to feel cool, because I remember when I was growing up, there was like this coolness, and you'll notice a lot of guys put jerseys up and stuff like that. And it's like, okay, I want foosball, I want pool, I want a Budweiser sign, I want, these, little, I want a fridge full of beers down here that anytime I come down here, I can just crack open a beer and just sit here and watch the game and do whatever. And so, like, because that's what they see as living the high life, because that's what I grew up wanting to do. And so Patsy, pulling from the prime of Miss Jean Brody and these exquisite meals, this is fancy um, 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 pineapples with cream, and they savored the last scoop of cream. They saved that to the last. They ate all the pineapple cubes and then saved the cream to the last scoop, and they ate it all in one. This is how Patsy sees high life and high living, right? And so that would end up on that. And so somebody might see a music video where somebody has a Bentley. And so guess what? The first thing that this individual does when they get money is they go and cop the Bentley. And so when they pull up in front of their friends are like, "Oh, you got the Bentley," like, and if we grew up together, "Oh, you got the Bentley," like, "Oh man, that's what's up, bro." Because I based my life, we always talked about, and that's not uncommon. We always talked about living the high life. And I always told you, man, one day what I tell you, I was going to get the Bentley just like so and so. And I did. So this, we can see Patsy's North, John's North, in the way of this prime of Jean Brody, and how she explicitly shows that, hey, man, these pineapples, start serving my kids this, because this is high living to me.
This stuff that I reference in the description, as I always try to do in my videos, and I hate asking for anybody to subscribe, because I hate asking anything from viewers. I know it's kind of like a douchey YouTube thing, but if you do want to subscribe for more videos, that would be great. I am really making a huge effort to try to make lots of new
Tell them subscribe, brother. Tell them subscribe, brother. If you working and making your content, brother, tell them subscribe, because I mean, why not?
interesting content, and so I would appreciate it if you would give me a sub and like the video and leave a comment if you have some input. And I'm always looking for other suggestions for videos as well. So, all right, so let's get into it. Okay, so just to establish the general backdrop here, The Prime of Miss Jean Brody was originally a 1961 novel by Muriel Spark, and Muriel Spark is a really interesting subject all her own. We'll touch on her a little bit more later in the video. She was a really interesting author who wrote a lot of really intense fiction, and she actually kind of reminds me of Patsy a little bit. There's some interesting echoes of that theatrical, quick-witted character. And the novel was made into a film in 1969, and both the novel and the film are really great. I would recommend both of them. The novel's very short, and you can get it on archive.org. You can borrow it for free. It's only, I think, 139 pages, so it goes real quick. I just read it in a few hours, and the writing is very unique, and it's very intense. And essentially, the novel is like a coming-of-age story of a group of young Scottish girls in an all-girls school, and there'd be a group of the girls that's known as the Brody set is being taught by Miss Jean Brody, who's a very over-the-top, unique instructor who brings like her own new ideas into the fold as a sort of like a upstart young Turk type agitator. And so the general tension is Miss Jean Brody is always trying to get shut down by the powers that be, the evil head mistress who wants all the girls not to have any fun and to be very boring and staid, whereas Miss Jean Brody wants to enliven them and put old heads on young shoulders and make women out of these young girls.
Little girls, I am in the business of putting old heads on young shoulders, and all my pupils are the creme de la creme.
In the movie version that came out in 1969, Jean Brody is played by Maggie Smith, who gives an incredible performance. And you may know Maggie Smith if you've watched Downton Abbey. She plays an older gal in that show, but
it's a very Patsy move. Boom, creme de la creme. Boom. To stand up like that, because you notice a lot of times Patsy she's doing this, and she was like, well, like a lot of times she does this, and she's kind of doing her head like that.
But in the prime of Miss Jean Brody, she's a much younger woman, and it was such a treat seeing her play such a role requiring such huge range. So yeah, it was a really fun movie to watch, and the setting is really interesting. It's in the 30s in Scotland, so the interwar period. So a lot of interesting stuff going on there. So just some notes here as we look through the Profoundly Patsy Reddit thread. We can see here Cottonstar has like a nice long write-up where he gets into sets the stage kind of like we've done here, talking about how this was a favorite play of Patsy's, Patsy and Pageantry, bread and butter. I thought that was a really great way of describing who Patsy was. She was, in my mind's eye, she seems like she's just like a very theatrical woman, and I sort of kind of grew up with girls like that were sort of like theater kids, but very socially adept. So she described how the pageants she performed, she prided herself in doing something different, and that it was her bread and butter, is what she called it, of her performances. He also describes how the references that we have of her friends and Patsy talking about her relationship with this play. Patsy had read and memorized and crafted a performance from this, so she knew this material very, very well. And it was a huge influence on her, and described it as her greatest influence growing up. And he, in this opening post here, he quotes from Linda McLean's book, which we'll also get a little bit more into, JonBenét's mother, how Patsy won the Miss Virginia pageant held in June 1977. She had just finished her last final exam of the semester and had to hurry home just in time for the event. For her talent presentation, she used a scene from the play called The Prime of Miss Jean Brody. This was the same scene she had performed to win national honors on our high school forensics team. In oral interpretation, a student takes a scene from a story or play and interprets it for the audience. There are no costumes, props, or theatrical makeup, and the speaker talks in a different voice for each character. Cottonstar really went above and beyond here by finding quotes from old newspaper articles from the 70s. This is incredible. He quotes from a Charleston Daily Mail article from 1977 where Patsy Ann Paw, later became Ramsey, said, "My talent is a dramatic interpretation that I wrote based on a portion of The Prime of Miss Jean Brody. I play two characters, Miss Mackay, the stern head mistress, and Jean Brody, the eccentric, vivacious school teacher. When I won second place in the national..."
Gotta portray two characters. There's a kidnapping. Got a kidnapping. So you just pop right into it. But the thing about theater is, though, especially high, because if you've been around theater kids, you know what acting looks like. And it's definitely not cinema. You know that they're being extra. I'm riveting and doing all of that. Like, I have a friend who she is trained theatrically. She went to college for it, and you can see it. You can see it come through in what she does. Obviously it can translate to the big screen, but it's when I was one of my first degrees was in what's called live entertainment or audiovisual systems. And so what I would do was I would do like the lighting and the sound, but mostly lighting for like some plays. I did some plays in community college and stuff like that, and hung around a lot of theater kids and stuff like that. And so like they're just like this gentleman saying they're just like a different breed. You know what I mean? They're just different. Not bad, just different. But you can tell that there's a certain extraness about what they're doing. And I think that, but you can tell it's acting. You can definitely tell it's acting. Like there's nothing that's going to make you believe that it's not acting unless they're like really good. And I believe that Patsy was good because people knew and they expected her to be acting. But in a real life situation, when we're no longer talking about acting, when I need you to be cinematic, when I need you to legitimately transition out of high school, because Patsy hasn't done this in a while, I don't think. This is not something she practices every day. So I want to kind of see you transition into like legitimate acting. And I think that Patsy was a little rusty. So when she jumps on the call, it's just like Kim Marshall-Letters is just like the 911 dispatcher who took the call. She's like, something's off here, because you can't just snap back into it like that. But from Patsy's perspective, because she won a talent award off of this. And if it's good enough to get a talent award, the talent award is the validation, or she got a scholarship or something like that. That's the validation. And so if you're validating me with well, I must be pretty good.
Forensic tournament in Philadelphia. The interpretation was 10 minutes long. For the talent competition, it had to be cut to 2 minutes and 50 seconds. It's very difficult to establish character and build to a dramatic climax in less than 3 minutes. I can just picture Patsy to establish how influential the prime of Miss Jean Brody was to Patsy. Definitely. Then Codstar gets in to bring up a bunch of the examples, like creme de la creme, which is a French term. And one of the themes in all of this is that the general idea, I think, that gets expressed in a lot of who Patsy is that European mainland stuff is sophisticated, hence JonBenét and the accent marks, and American stuff is a little bit more backwater. And that's a theme that you definitely see played out in the book. And then Codstar then also goes into how Patsy brought up the prime of Miss Jean Brody even in her police interviews. And she kind of goes over that story again here, where he takes something from the transcript, and we see Patsy talking to Detective Trujillo about how she had done the prime of Miss Jean Brody for her Miss West Virginia and won with that, and then went to do Miss America. And she goes through the whole. Patsy has a whole spiel that she talks about with why she couldn't get the rights to do the prime of Miss Jean Brody. Apparently, she attempted through, I think, like an elected official, like maybe like the lieutenant governor or somebody like that. She'd known somebody who was an elected official that tried to help her petition the screenwriters to let her use it for Miss America, because I guess it might have been televised, but she couldn't get the rights, so she had to adapt her own scene. So she has this whole story that she tells a couple different times in a couple different places, about the rights and royalties, and so anyway, she tells the detective this whole story. So it's a big enough deal that she's, that when you end up talking about the prime of Miss Jean Brody to a detective in a murder case, because it was that big of a deal for you in the Miss America contest or whatever. I mean, that says a lot, that it kind of keeps showing up over and over again. Anytime we want to sort of delve into who Patsy was, it's sitting there as one of the thumbnails. And so there, and then here, helpfully, Cotton Star also lists a bunch of quotes from the book and the play, where words that are familiar from the Ransom note or the case come up, including this passage where Monica, one of the girls, swings an attaché case full of books at the other girls. And then we have a passage in the book describing that the specialty of the feast was the pineapple cubes with cream, and that both girls saved the cream to the last and ate it in spoonfuls, which is basically exactly what the final meal of JonBenét was. And they found, pineapple with cream in a bowl in the house that night. So it's definitely a very significant detail. And at one point in the book, a character asks aloud whether or not she says she can't remember how to spell possession with one S or two. What just so happens that possession is like one of two words that's misspelled in the note, and people have long speculated that those misspellings were put there on purpose to, again, try to lead the reader to a conclusion. And so then at this point, Constar in the thread describes how this is, this linguistic techniques have also been used to be able to find other people, like the Unabomber was found out. His identity was discovered as being Ted Kaczynski through a similar line of unique linguistics, the have your cake and eat it too expression that his brother recognized. And then the other thing that he mentions that's a really great point that I wouldn't have thought of even after having read and seen the movie is that there's a plot device where there's a fake letter that's found in a book that the evil headmistress, uses to try to frame Miss Jean Brody. And there's this discussion in the book about, it was two different hands that were, fabricated this note, which just has a lot of really eerie allusions to the note in the JonBenét murder case, because one of the main leading speculations is that the note was actually a collaboration where Patsy was the one actually writing it, where John may have been contributing ideas, sort of dictating.
Yeah, I was just about to say, man, if that's the case, if that book says that, then that is crazy. If that book presents that, then that's crazy, because it's almost like prophetic in a sense, almost like a foretelling in a way of me reading as Patsy, me reading this book and seeing this in the book, where this note, this letter that is going to frame or try to frame someone or divert attention is going to be the product of two people. And then years later, and that's when Patsy was like 16, 17, and then she gets into high school and she's like 21, 22, something like that, 21, 22, girls. And then what 18, 20 years later, she's in that exact position with, well, people are accusing her of being in that exact position to where she is she is writing with the help of a second person who people would say would be John dictating. Like, it's funny how your life patterns and you don't even see it.
Hating his thoughts. So yeah, I definitely would recommend checking out this thread. It's a great thread. There's a link in the comments if you want to check it out, because there's a lot of other really interesting conversation in the thread, and some of it I've incorporated in stuff that I looked into in terms of follow-up. So just want to add a few more points about things that I saw in the film and the book, and just also just want to follow up a little bit about Muriel Spark, a really amazing, interesting writer, the woman who wrote, the author of The Prime of Miss Jean Brody. So just give you a little bit more of a sense of who Muriel Spark is, the writer of The Prime of Miss Jean Brody. I found a really great New Yorker article that profiles her and talks about a biography of her that was written, and sort of goes over her whole career. She had a fascinating career. She was somebody that I also sort of identify with in a weird way, because she was sort of a late bloomer as well in terms of her literary aspirations. She wasn't a published author, I think, until she was around 40. And she just seemed like Muriel Spark just seemed like a really interesting lady, the way she's described in articles. Seems like she was a real firecracker. She had her opinions, and her writing style is utterly unique. It's hard to describe, but it's like she writes.
That's a good point. Because I think John described JonBenét as a spark plug in the family, but I would describe Patsy as a firecracker. And when we say birds of a feather flock together, or you resonate with some of the language that is most closely associated with you. And so when we think about Patsy, what is it about this book that got Patsy's attention? What is it about this book, this play, that not only did you say, hey, I'll be a part of it in high school, but that had you reading it, or that had you performing it not only on a local level, but on an international level, not international, but on a national level, for Miss USA to say that this is good enough to carry me all the way to the top? What is it about this that resonates with you so well? Because when you do a play, you have to, or when you do something, when you're going to perform it, you have to do something that you're comfortable with, and something that you can feel as natural as possible when you're doing it. So you want to do like a monologue or what have you of something that you can really get behind, that you can really feel. I want to be able to cry when I need to cry. I want to be able to laugh when I need to laugh. I want to be able to feel everything. It's ideal that I feel everything about this piece. Well, it's easy to feel everything about this piece when I resonate with it. A lot of times you'll hear River Phoenix kind of said something similar. Rest RIP to him. He said something similar, in that there was a play, not a play, there's like a movie that he a character that he was, can't remember the movie, but he said, this character, I resonated with this character so much. There were some things going on at home, and this guy had some things going on at home, so I resonated with this character so much. And so it makes sense that Patsy, there are some things about Miss Jean Brody that resonate with Patsy. You got the stern headmistress, but then you also got the very vibrant woman who's giving coming out parties, and she's just fun. Patsy is by nature fun, but is there a dichotomy, right? Is there a dichotomy to where I have to be stern, right? I have to be, very up and down. I have to have some sort of level of rules and regulations, because that's how Nidra is. That's how Nidra's going to be. So my mom put that in me. And so I see value in that. And so you'll probably see that come out of me. So so when Patsy looks at it, she's probably like reading, the headmistress is like, oh, sounds like my mom. Okay. I know how to play my mom, so I got that. Oh, this, Gene Brody sounds like me. Well, I'm bubbly like that anyway, so I know how to do that. And I would want my kids to have this, and I would want to take care of my kids like this. And so it resonates with her, and she carries it forward because it resonates. Good to know. And it resonates even more because the writer, through carefully constructed language, the fire coming through the writer. And the writer is saying, I am a writer of this magnitude, of this degree, of this pedigree. This is who I am. And I want everything I put down on this page. I want the reader to feel me coming through this page. And that resonated with Patsy. And Patsy said, this is something I can take into the future with me. These are things I want all of that. You know how you sit down with somebody and you're having a conversation and they're just saying something that is just like lighting you up, and you feel everything that they're saying, and it's just got you in a trance. It's like, yeah, I understand everything that you're talking about. I actually agree with everything that you're talking about. It would be awesome if we can get together and do this, that, and the third. We could do whatever. Absolutely. I believe Patsy felt that when she read Muriel Sparks, right? I believe Patsy felt that because Muriel was a firecracker in that way. And so that resonated with Patsy.
Writes in these little slice of life vignettes, and her prose is very spare, and she communicates so much with so little, so economical. Like that book, The Prime of Miss Jean Brody, is only 140 pages, but I mean, it is a whole story in there, and it's like just like a paragraph or two can tell you so much. I mean, she's really a writer that definitely will repay the reading. She's a very unique, interesting talent. So, but anyway, here's a couple quick quotes about Muriel Spark that I found in that New Yorker article that I thought had some interesting resonance with Patsy. Spark was never a creator of character, the author of this article writes. She was a trickster of circumstances, a writer whose narrative voice speaks from the past or present or future at her own whim and will. She never foreshadows action when she can simply foretell it, with as much cruelty or merriment as she pleases. And the writer of this article really was a really great writer as well. It's always a great pleasure when you have a great writer writing about a great writer. So yeah, the profile, which I'll also include a link of because I think it's a great profile. It was a books review article by Thomas Mallon from 2010 called Transfigured, and it covers a new biography that had just come out about Muriel Spark. One more quote from the article. It could easily apply to both Patsy and Muriel Spark, but this is about Muriel Spark. Easily enraged, Spark always demanded inordinate levels of attention and discretion. She thirsted for respect and invited protection, but as her biographer amply demonstrates, the border between protection and oppression was always narrow. She repeatedly organized novels like The Public Image, 1968, around her heroines' resistance to attempted takeovers. She could rarely trust or keep friends. Other people needed to be as manipulable as her literary characters. One other quick note from the Reddit thread before I get into a couple observations from the book. The username 14th Century Hood mentioned that Steve Thomas's book has a reference to The Prime of Miss Jean Brody, and I looked it up and confirmed that it does, but it just has one quick mention that he talked to Linda McLean about Patsy using the play for her talent portion of her Miss America stuff. So that's all. It's just a quick mention. So one of the interesting things about The Prime of Miss Jean Brody as a book is that it has a lot of different sort of palace intrigue revolving around this girls' school, and there's just a lot of quotes about people being, there's like one girl who's sort of like the redheaded stepchild, and so she's described it at one point as being too stupid to cover up. A lot of that just sort of interesting talk about secrets and intrigue. And early on in the book, we get this description of Miss Jean Brody describing her fiance dying in World War II. And pretty early on, we're also, given the setting of this book is in the 30s. So basically, we get the impression that Miss Jean Brody's, even though she just describes herself as being in her prime, it's sort of ironic saying in that she's probably getting up there in age in her 40s. And so that has a lot of resonance in terms of Patsy having just turned 30 after surviving cancer and, being a beauty queen who is starting to lose her luster, her youth. And one thing that's really sort of arresting as I started reading the book is that it's like, wow, this book is a lot. Like, I had never read Muriel Sparks stuff before, and I was like, it was sort of shocking because the book, I watched the movie first, and the movie was, it's pretty spicy in its own way, but it was sort of more conventionally interesting, whereas Muriel Sparks' writing does not play. Like, the book in certain aspects is much darker and much more twisted than the movie, and in a good way, I would say. I mean, it surprised me how much it went there. So I don't want to spoil it, but the prose by Muriel Spark is very strong, very strong. And so one little side tangent I want to take here, because it mentions another book that I really love, is that one of the interesting things about the book and the movie is that the Miss Brody character is a big fan of Mussolini, and like I said, sort of like a cosmopolitan, continental European lover. But it's interesting because it shows, I think, in some ways, like the flaws of Miss Jean Brody's thinking. I mean, that might be one of the thematic purposes of having her be really in love with like the whole idea of fascism. But one thing that it immediately called to mind for me is a book that I read a couple years ago called Terror, Love, and Brainwashing by Alexandra Stein. It's a really fascinating book that I stumbled into as I was researching domestic violence, while I happened to be also really far down the rabbit hole about cults. And I was like, it kept occurring to me that there's a lot of overlap between those two mindsets. And sort of on my own, I started looking to see if anybody else had written about this. And it turns out that, yes, in fact, there's a really interesting woman named Alexandra Stein who wrote a book about her idea called attachment theory, which says that there's a sort of an overlap in the frame of mind or some of the characteristics of the relationships between high control groups, aka cults, and then domestic violence relationships, and then totalitarian regimes. All of them have a sort of similar or maladaptive type of attachment disorder that they're displaying. Anyway, I'll put a link to the description for her stuff because it's really wild, interesting, and I do think that there is some fertile ground there for further inquiry, because I have just noticed a few things that I just have noticed a lot of overlap between some of those phenomena: terror, love, and brainwashing. Interesting stuff. And the other thing that sort of dawned on me too as I was reading this is that in the book and the movie, Jean Brody is a school teacher, so she teaches like a whole class of kids, but she has like a handful of girls that she favors particularly. And in the book and in the movie, they're called the Brody set. They're her special girls. It's a group of about, I think, 5 or 6 girls that she takes to extracurricular events and tries to transfer her love of culture and music and art. And this has a lot of characteristics of a high control group. You have your in groups and out groups, and so it really sort of struck me on a meta level that that there's a lot of interesting parallels between the Brody set and a cult. And in fact, one interesting part of the book later on has like the young girls of the Brody set discussing how they had this peculiar teacher growing up named Miss Jean Brody, as they're looking back in retrospect, and one of their husbands says, "I always knew your upbringing was a bit peculiar." Yeah, it's just really funny the way that it's described in retrospect. And then I got pretty far into the book before I realized that one of the girls was reading a book called Kidnapped in the book, like a book within a book was called Kidnapped, and so the girls were fantasizing about these weird kidnap scenarios. So this is a very This book, it's definitely not for the faint of heart. But that just kind of hit me on the face because it's like looking for parallels to murder kidnapping case JonBenét. It's like, wow, they're just all over the place in this book. Right in front of you and somewhat more removed, but yeah, lots of interesting parallels.
But why? Why were there certain things pulled out of this book? I that's what I don't understand. Like, I understand the parallels, but why? Why were those things parallels? Why pull out attaché? Why pull out possession? Why take away the fruit, the pineapples and cream? Why the ransom note or the letter that framed someone? When we think about how to cover up, if this is a cover up, if we think about somebody covering something up, why are they covering up? Why are they covering it up this way? How do I even put myself? Because this is somebody I'm just thinking, I have to think. So somebody in this moment becomes, they snap into what they think is a good idea. So if there is a cover up and I see my daughter on the floor, and in this moment I realize that she is dead, what do? How I freeze. And I'm like, what the heck do I do? And the first thing that comes to my mind is some things from the prime of Miss Jean Brody. I need to write a letter. I need to stage a kidnapping. I need to, follow this same language. Why is there triangulation around these certain things? From like, what is the ransom note writer? What is Patsy taking away to where she says there's something in this book that says possession will pull that out. Attaché will pull that out. Something a go back and forth, and I'd actually like to read what that letter says. A go back and forth, but a back and forth. I'm sorry, between John Ramsey and this foreign faction. I wonder if the actual letter that the headmistress has any kind of back and forth like that. I wonder if that's the case.
One point in the book, there's references to, like American tourists and Miss Jean Brody calling them vulgar. I thought this was just like an interesting, in light of Patsy loving accent on everything and probably being a little bit self-conscious about her own hickish West Virginia upbringing. I could just hear Hannibal Lecter's voice. With all those rude, sticky fumblings with boys in the back seat. All right, yeah, that's the best I'm gonna do. There's also a subplot about two girls involving them working together. Yeah, okay, on the story of Jean Brody's love life. That's the note that gets revealed in the climactic thing. There's just a lot of spy motifs and even different suggestions of people actually being involved in the spy service, as it was in the interwar period. There's also, I also want to make too much of this because it's kind of like not exactly a one-to-one parallel, but there is a scene in this one where there's like a creeper that exposes himself to one of the younger.
And there would be that element of war because both of their parents grew up during that time period, so they understand and they would have learned about it. So their parents would have lived through it. Especially John would have touched on it just like a little bit, but the parents would have lived through it and raised their kids like to talk about that. The parents would have lived through that and told their kids about that. It's like not too long ago we had World War II. Not too far removed ago we had the Dust Bowl. We had Runs on the Bank. We had Bonnie and Clyde. We had the Great Depression, right? And so like these are things that are going to stick out and mean something to Patsy and John because John is military. When they go to write this, John is military. So it's going to be written in a somewhat militant structure, in a somewhat militant way. It's going to have Patsy wording and it's going to have Patsy framing, but it's going to be written in a direct and very militant way. Mr. Ramsey, listen carefully. We have your daughter. You can just hear the dun 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 dun, dun, like the drum roll of like standing at attention. You see what I'm saying? Like as you just kind of very clear, very concise, very to the point, clear, concise, to the point, clear. It's rambling, but it's clear, concise, clear, concise. Mr. Ramsey, we're a small foreign faction. We have your daughter. If you do this, like the sentence structure, this, if this, then this. If this, then this. If this, then this. Patsy can write all she wants to basically she's writing for theatrics because I got to get the point out. I got to explain the point because it's kind of repetitive in that way. I got to explain the point in several different ways, but it's very sharp and to the point. When you read that, you're not confused about what's going on. This person is saying, here we are, have your daughter. And that's that very, because even the cartoons of that time, you go back and watch some of the cartoons in American television, you go back and watch the cartoons, those cartoons were dedicated to wartime efforts. And so some of the stuff you see, man, you'd be like, hey, yo, this is crazy. You know what I mean? Like this is straight up wartime information. These are straight up wartime visuals because they didn't care, because they were like, hey, no, absolutely. Be a part of the fact that we're going to war, period.
Oh, and there's also a few references in the book to Jean Brody, like having something growing inside of her, like assuming like a reference to some sort of internal cancer. Could have easily been ovarian cancer, just like Patsy.
Yeah.
So I just thought that was really eerie that there is that parallel between both Miss Jean Brody and Patsy dying young from some kind of cancer. Very sad. So again, I just thought that whole parallel with Patsy sort of having her 40th birthday right around that same time is always like
that's what I was going to say. Number one, that's a good point that he brought up. But number one, I think that this would be something that she would pass on to her kids because it had such an effect on her. Number one. Number two, I think that this is something that would come back to Patsy as she has her cancer, because we think about that internal something growing inside me. Yes, absolutely. That's Patsy all the way. That's language that Patsy would use. Absolutely. And so when I get to that certain place in my life, I again think back to psychological reversion. I think back to, hey, there was a time in my life where I went over this book. I opened this book again and I say, man, there's this passage in Miss Jean Brody that talks about something growing inside of her. And I feel exactly like that. That's exactly, I'm just thinking about that. Yeah, man, it's exactly.
I guess I'd been an under-considered part of this. I mean, that as somebody that just recently turned 40 not that long ago, it's like, yeah, that's a biggie. And as a schlubby dude, it's a lot different, I'm sure, than if I can't even imagine if at one point I'd won some sort of pageant. I mean, Jesus Christ, I would never live it down, I'm sure. Turning 40 would be much worse if I actually cared about how I looked. Okay. Yeah. Just one other quick note is that, yeah, okay. Yeah, I have so many thoughts about the book that I almost don't even want to go in here, because it's just like I don't want this to end up becoming like a review of Muriel Sparks' work in addition to how this relates to the Ramsey case, because it almost got kind of swept away with how great of a writer she was. Almost was like, screw this Ramsey case. I want to talk more about Muriel Sparks. She's a real fascinating lady, but I think that this is still such a interesting underexplored thing. So the other thing I want to kind of go through real quick is that I also read JonBenét's Mother, The Tragedy and the Truth by Linda Edison McLean, which is a 1998 book written by Linda McLean, who's Patsy's good friend.
Yeah, so when in Linda McLean was, if you watched the Lisa Gibbons interview in 98, Linda McLean was on the phone. And she was defending the Ramseys. She's the one who said, oh, I've known Patsy for 25 years. She wouldn't do something like that. And then somebody shot back, oh, I don't care how long you've known somebody, people can snap. Somebody from the crowd, I think, or something like that. And so she did write a book. I didn't look it up or anything, but she did write a book about Patsy. I didn't want to download it because I was like, man, I'm really not in the mood to be hearing them like schmooze like Patsy and John. I'm really not, man. My brain has to be there to hear them just talk about how John and Patsy are God's gift to the world. It's just like John and Patsy could never do any wrong. I kiss the ground that John and Patsy walk on. Don't you ever talk about my John and my Patsy. How dare you? And you want to go to war with me? I couldn't bring myself to do it. So I did. I might later, just to see how the friends try to frame, because Pam Griffin was so interesting to me. She was so interesting to me in that she was like, John and Patsy, they don't even think like that. They would never do their daughter like that. Miss America, they didn't even want their daughter to do that. And John came back and was like, oh yeah, Patsy and her family, they did want John to be Miss America. And actually, in fact, people were saying about JonBenét that this one could go all the way. So I think from an internal perspective and an external perspective, we were all on the same page. This girl is going big for Miss America, and we legitimately are trying to win Miss America, and probably not only Miss America, we're probably trying to win whatever they call it, Miss Global or Miss International, whatever title or crown there is for that. That's what I'm trying to win. That's probably what they're trying to do with JonBenét. But the staunchness with which Pam was defending, the staunchness with which, Pam Griffin, and I was getting ready to say Pam Paul, but I realized they both are named Pam. It's like the staunchness with which they both defend, and then Linda comes in, Linda McLean, and she defends. It's interesting to see, and it's blind. It's blind defending. Like, you're defending somebody with like. They asked Linda. They said, "Hey, did you ask Patsy about who she thinks did it and what she thinks happened?" No, we don't even talk about it, bruh. So y'all just sitting up here around these people with your kids, and you don't even really know what happened. Nobody's curious. Nobody is curious. Oh yeah, man, there was these people that we met, and my son asked if they could come with us. I didn't even know this kid. Burke knew him, but I ain't know him. I don't know nothing about that kid. But I said, yeah, bring him on. Let's go on vacation. They can come with us. Parents didn't know us. We didn't know them, and said, hey, screw you. We'll talk to you when we get back. Don't ask me to stop what I'm doing to talk to you. Talk to you when we get back. That's how we roll. So it's interesting to see not only how the Ramseys frame themselves, but how the Ramseys' friends perceive and frame, and not because the friends are not trying to perceive the Ramseys. They're trying to protect the Ramseys, and in trying to protect the Ramseys, not only are they trying to frame the Ramseys in a certain way to you, the public, so you can think of the Ramseys in a certain way, they're trying to speak highly and drive the Ramseys into a place in your mind and your heart, and set the Ramseys on the pedestal. And that makes me ask, who are the Ramseys to them? What have the Ramseys done for them? What have the Ramseys said that lock them in? Because what is it? Judith Miller or Phillips, one of the two, said, man, look, man, I wouldn't talk to the cops because I just wanted to help. That's it. And they got mad at me. But what did Judith do differently and say, you know what, I'm maybe not giving up the friendship, but I'm just doing something different? What was different about that? That's what I want to know. But that's a lot. Almost at an hour. So I'm going to stop right there. Let me know what you think thus far. Like, share, subscribe, and drop a comment. I think some of you have seen this before, and so if you have, just like skip or do whatever you need to do. But yeah, let me know what you think. Like, subscribe. Until next video, I'm gonna kind of continue this. Take it easy.